My name is Danette Reynolds, 32 years old, and until yesterday the Chief Financial Officer at Meridian Technologies. When I walked into work this morning, I never imagined I'd be clearing out my desk by noon. Your salary is an indulgence, my boss's wife said, firing me on her first day as CEO. I just smiled. They had no idea what was coming. In the board meeting happening right now, the deal lawyer is probably sliding a paper to my old boss, per the change of control clause. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you want more stories about workplace justice. I still remember my first day at Meridian Technologies 10 years ago. Fresh out of graduate school with my MBA, I walked into the modest office building with nothing but determination and student loan debt. As an accounting intern, I was assigned to the finance department, a small team of 4 people managing the books for what was then a struggling tech startup. Richard Harmon, the founder and CEO, was different from other tech entrepreneurs I'd read about. In his mid-40s then, he wasn't some young coding genius with venture capital connections. He was a former engineer who had mortgaged his house to start Meridian, believing in his vision of affordable security software for small businesses. The first time we met, he asked me what I thought of the company's cash flow projections. I told him honestly they were too optimistic. Instead of getting defensive, he laughed and said, "Finally, someone who won't just tell me what I want to hear." That honesty became the foundation of our professional relationship. Within 6 months, I was promoted from intern to financial analyst. By my 3rd year, I became the finance manager. Richard valued my analytical mind and direct approach. While some found my frankness intimidating, Richard appreciated that I never sugarcoated numbers. "Numbers don't lie," he would say, "and neither does Danette." My ascent to CFO wasn't traditional. When our previous CFO left suddenly for a competitor, Richard took a chance on me despite my relatively young age. At 30, I became one of the youngest CFOs in our industry. Some board members had concerns, but Richard stood firm. "She knows this company's finances better than anyone, including me," he argued. He wasn't wrong. I had grown alongside Meridian, watching it expand from 30 employees to over 200. Our annual revenue had increased tenfold, and we'd opened offices in 3 additional cities. I had helped design the financial structure that supported this growth, creating systems that maximized efficiency while maintaining compliance. The true test came 2 years ago, when a major client defaulted on a significant payment, creating a cash flow crisis that threatened to sink us. For 3 straight days, I barely left my office, reworking projections, calling in favors from vendors for extended payment terms, and restructuring our debt obligations. When I finally presented the rescue plan to Richard, his eyes widened at the creative yet sound approach I'd developed. "This isn't just saving us," he said, reviewing my proposal. "This positions us for even stronger growth when we weather this storm." That crisis cemented my place as Richard's trusted advisor. Together, we built Meridian into a respected, mid-sized player in the tech security space. My financial stewardship earned industry recognition, and I was even featured in a business magazine as an under 40 financial whiz to watch. My daily routine before everything changed was demanding but fulfilling. I arrived at 7:30 each morning, reviewed overnight reports from our Asian partners, and prepared for my 8:30 briefing with Richard. We discussed cash positions, ongoing projects, and strategic priorities over coffee in his office. The rest of my day involved meetings with department heads, reviewing contract terms, analyzing performance metrics, and planning for future growth. The Meridian team became my second family. James Wilson, our chief operating officer and Richard's college friend, brought practical operations expertise that complemented my financial focus. My assistant, Andrea Coleman, was more than just support staff. She was my sounding board and loyal friend who kept me organized and occasionally reminded me to eat lunch. Thomas Wright, our company lawyer, respected my attention to detail and often consulted me on the financial implications of legal decisions. Under Richard's leadership, Meridian fostered a collaborative culture where results mattered more than office politics. We worked hard, celebrated wins together, and supported each other through challenges. Richard led by example, often staying late to help teams meet deadlines, and knowing the names of even the newest employees. The first hint that this ecosystem might change came during our quarterly leadership retreat last month. Richard seemed unusually tired, excusing himself early from dinner discussions he typically dominated. When he mentioned bringing in additional leadership support, we assumed he meant hiring a chief technology officer, a position we'd discussed for months. I dismissed the rumors about significant leadership changes. Richard and I had just finalized our 5-year growth strategy the previous week. He'd been enthusiastic about our planned expansion into international markets. Nothing suggested he was planning to step back. How wrong I was! The announcement came on a Monday morning. Richard called an all-hands meeting with only 30 minutes' notice, unusual for someone who typically planned communications meticulously. As we gathered in the main conference room, I noticed his complexion was paler than normal, and he leaned slightly on the podium as he spoke. "I've been putting off some medical concerns," Richard began, his voice steady, despite the bombshell he was about to drop. "My doctors are insistent that I take a temporary step back from day-to-day operations to focus on my health." Murmurs rippled through the room. Richard had always seemed invincible, working longer hours than anyone, despite being 20 years older than most of the staff. "During my medical leave, I need someone I trust completely to guide Meridian," he continued. "Therefore, effective immediately, my wife Patricia will be stepping in as interim CEO." The shock in the room was palpable. Patricia Harmon had visited our offices occasionally for holiday parties, but she had no experience in our industry. Her background was in luxury retail management, a world away from enterprise security software. As CFO, I kept my expression neutral, though my mind raced with questions and concerns. James caught my eye from across the room, his furrowed brow mirroring my own internal alarm. This was the first either of us, Richard's most senior executives, had heard of this plan. Richard concluded by assuring everyone this was temporary and introducing Patricia, who had been waiting just outside. She walked in wearing an impeccably tailored designer suit that probably cost more than what our junior developers made in a month. "I'm honored to step in while Richard focuses on his health," Patricia said with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I look forward to learning about this company he loves so much and working with all of you talented people." Her gaze swept across the room, lingering momentarily on me. Something in that look, assessment, challenge, perhaps even dismissal, sent a chill through me. The transition began immediately. Patricia took over Richard's office that same day, replacing his modest furniture with sleeker, more expensive pieces. She requested daily briefings from all department heads, insisting on detailed reports that duplicated information already available in our management systems. Our first one-on-one meeting set the tone for our relationship. I arrived with comprehensive financial overviews, prepared to walk her through our fiscal strategy and current position. "These reports look complex," she said, barely glancing at the carefully prepared presentations. "Can't you simplify them? Just give me the bottom line." I explained that our business model's nuances required detailed analysis. "The competitive advantage in our pricing structure comes from understanding the interplay between these factors," I said, pointing to a multivariable projection. "Richard and I developed this system to—" "Richard isn't here," Patricia interrupted, "and I prefer more straightforward approaches. These seem unnecessarily complicated." "They're complex because our business is complex," I countered, trying to keep frustration from my voice. "These models have helped us increase profitability by 27% over 2 years. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "I've managed businesses before. Profit is revenue minus expenses. The rest is just window dressing." That simplistic view of financial management alarmed me, but I maintained my professionalism. "I'd be happy to schedule additional time to walk through how these models support decision-making," I offered. "That won't be necessary," she replied, checking her watch. "I've arranged for some external perspective. A fresh set of eyes, so to speak." The fresh eyes arrived the next day in the form of Samantha Lewis, introduced as a financial consultant, but whom I recognized as Patricia's former colleague from her retail days. Samantha had no experience in technology or software as a service business models, yet Patricia insisted she review all financial operations. Within days, I found myself excluded from meetings I'd previously led. Patricia began scheduling financial discussions when I had standing appointments with investors. When I raised concerns about being sidelined, she smiled thinly and suggested I was being territorial. Meridian needs to evolve, she told me, during a particularly tense exchange. Some of these processes seem designed to make you indispensable rather than to maximize company efficiency. The atmosphere throughout the company deteriorated rapidly. Patricia brought in several other consultants, each taking over aspects of the business without bothering to understand existing processes. Long-standing team meetings were canceled and replaced with top-down directives. Andrea kept me informed about whispers from other departments. Engineering is furious, she told me one afternoon, closing my office door. Patricia's friend Karen, who knows nothing about software development, told them to cut development time in half for the new security module. When they explained that would compromise quality, she said they were making excuses. I tried reaching Richard, leaving messages about my concerns, but received only brief texts in response. "Trust Patricia," one read. "She has fresh perspectives we need." My breakthrough came accidentally. Working late one evening, I noticed light in the conference room, typically used for board meetings. The door was slightly ajar, and Patricia's voice carried clearly. "The valuation is solid," she was saying. "Meridian's intellectual property alone justifies the price." Pausing near the door, I heard an unfamiliar male voice respond. "Nextech is prepared to move quickly, but we need assurance that key personnel won't be obstacles." Nextech was our largest competitor, a company that had tried to acquire us twice before. Richard had always refused their offers, believing in our independent future. "I'm restructuring the executive team," Patricia replied. "The most likely resistance would come from the CFO, but that's being handled." My blood ran cold. Patricia wasn't just mismanaging Meridian. She was actively working to sell it against all our established strategic plans, and apparently, I was the obstacle being handled. I retreated silently, mind racing. My loyalty was to Meridian and the vision Richard and I had built together. I needed evidence of what Patricia was planning, and I needed to understand why Richard would allow this radical departure from our agreed strategy. Over the next week, I carefully documented every questionable decision, every instance where Patricia's actions contradicted our established plans. I noticed Samantha accessing financial projections and altering numbers to make short-term profits look better at the expense of long-term sustainability, classic window dressing for a company being prepared for sale. During a leadership meeting, I attempted to correct a serious error in Samantha's presentation about our projected revenue. "These numbers don't align with our actual sales pipeline," I pointed out, pulling up the correct data. "We're showing a 34% projected increase here, but our actual signed contracts only support about 18% growth." Patricia cut me off before I could finish. "Danette, your pessimism is becoming tiresome. Samantha has incorporated growth factors you've consistently underestimated." "It's not pessimism, it's accuracy," I insisted. "I can show you the actual contract values." "That won't be necessary," Patricia interrupted again, her tone sharp enough to silence the room. "Perhaps your overly conservative projections are why Meridian hasn't grown faster under your financial guidance." The public rebuke stung, but more concerning was the deliberate misrepresentation of our financial position. Were they inflating numbers to make the company more attractive to Nextech? After the meeting, I confronted Samantha directly about her flawed analysis. Instead of engaging with my concerns, she smiled condescendingly. "Patricia warned me you might be resistant to change. Don't worry, we'll manage fine without your input." The next morning, Patricia's assistant emailed me. "Miss Harmon requests your presence in her office at 11 a.m. sharp. Please ensure you're available and on time." The formal tone was ominous. As I prepared for the meeting, Andrea gave me a worried look. "Something's happening. HR has been pulling files all morning, and Thomas has been in Patricia's office for over an hour." I thanked her for the warning, gathered my tablet with the evidence I'd compiled, and headed to what I suspected would be a confrontation. I had no idea it would be my last walk through the halls of Meridian as its CFO. Before confronting Patricia, I decided I needed to speak with Richard directly. I called him that evening suggesting dinner to discuss company matters. To my surprise, he agreed to meet at an Italian restaurant we'd frequented during late work sessions. Richard looked diminished somehow. The confident leader I'd known for a decade seemed smaller, his shoulders slightly hunched, his once vibrant eyes tired. After ordering, I wasted no time. Patricia is meeting secretly with Nextech executives. She's preparing to sell Meridian. I kept my voice low but firm. And she's manipulating financial projections to make the deal more attractive. I expected shock, or at least concern. Instead, Richard sighed and swirled his wine glass, watching the red liquid create a tiny vortex. Patricia believes consolidation is inevitable in our industry, he said finally. She may have a point. Smaller companies like ours are finding it harder to compete with tech giants entering the security space. We've discussed this, I countered, leaning forward. Our niche focus is our strength. We've consistently outperformed larger competitors in our specific market segment. Richard nodded absently, perhaps. But there are factors beyond business strategy to consider now. Like what I pressed. He looked up, and for a moment I glimpsed vulnerability I'd never seen before. My health situation is more complicated than I've let on. And Patricia has strong views about the company's future. Something in his evasive response suggested he wasn't fully in control of the situation. Was Patricia leveraging his health concerns to push her agenda? I tried another angle. The 5-year growth plan we finalized last month positions us perfectly for sustained independence. Why abandon it now? Richard's response was non-committal. Plans change, Danette. Sometimes we need to be flexible. This wasn't the Richard Harmon I knew, the man who had built Meridian through unwavering commitment to his vision. As our dinner concluded, he promised to consider my concerns, but I left with the distinct impression that Patricia held the real power now. Back at work, the systematic dismantling of my authority accelerated. Patricia removed me from the Financial Oversight Committee, claiming it would streamline decision-making. When I objected, she suggested I was having trouble adapting to new leadership styles. My allies within the company found themselves similarly marginalized. James was suddenly sent on a fact-finding mission to our smallest satellite office, effectively removing him from headquarters for weeks. 3 senior managers who had openly questioned Patricia's decisions were placed on special projects that isolated them from their teams. Meanwhile, Samantha took over more of my responsibilities without the necessary expertise. During a meeting with our banking partners, she confidently presented completely incorrect information about our debt covenants. I had to intervene to prevent a potential default triggering event, which earned me a scathing private rebuke from Patricia afterward. You undermined Samantha in front of external partners, she accused. I prevented an error that could have violated our loan agreements, I countered. Samantha doesn't understand our banking relationships or terms. Perhaps you should have briefed her better, Patricia replied coldly. Your inability to properly delegate or support transitions speaks volumes about your leadership capabilities. The gaslighting was as brazen as it was unjust. I had attempted to brief Samantha numerous times, but she had canceled or cut short every session, claiming she already understood the material. The financial mismanagement worsened. Samantha produced a quarterly projection that showed a 48% revenue increase with no corresponding rise in expenses, a mathematical impossibility given our business model. When I created an accurate correction, Patricia refused to review it. Through Andrea, I learned that Patricia was holding meetings about a corporate restructuring without involving me or other long-term executives. A contact in the legal department quietly confirmed that Thomas was reviewing documents related to a potential sale. Then came the most alarming discovery yet. While working late one evening, I accessed the shared drive containing our confidential contract templates documents I had personally helped develop. The change of control provisions had been modified, weakening protections that would typically ensure continuity for employees and customers during an acquisition. The next morning, I arrived to find Samantha sitting at my desk going through my files. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. Patricia asked me to review your departmental organization. She's concerned the financial team has inefficiencies. Those files contain confidential information about employee performance and compensation, I said. You don't have authorization to access them. Samantha smiled, a practiced expression that never reached her eyes. Actually, I do. Patricia signed off this morning. She held up a document with Patricia's signature, granting her full access to all financial department resources. This is inappropriate and possibly violates company policy, I said, maintaining my composure despite my anger. Company policies are changing, Samantha replied. You might want to consider changing with them. The threat was thinly veiled. Later that day, I discovered Samantha had called a meeting with my entire team without inviting me. According to a loyal team member, she had introduced herself as the acting financial director and asked detailed questions about each person's responsibilities. I attempted to schedule an emergency meeting with the board of directors, but the board secretary recently hired by Patricia informed me that all board communications now needed to go through the CEO's office first. I was being systematically isolated, my authority undermined, and my position weakened. But I still had one advantage: I knew Meridian's financial structure better than anyone, having designed much of it myself. If Patricia and her allies were manipulating information to facilitate a sale to Nextech, I would need irrefutable evidence to stop them. Working carefully to avoid detection, I compiled documentation of the altered projections, the modified contract templates, and the systematic exclusion of key executives from strategic decisions. I secured this evidence in encrypted files, both on and off company servers. Just as I was finalizing my documentation, Patricia's assistant appeared at my office door. Miss Harmon would like to see you immediately. The formal tone and her refusal to meet my eyes confirmed what I already suspected: this wasn't going to be a routine meeting. Thank you, I replied calmly, gathering my tablet. Please let her know I'll be right there. Andrea caught my arm as I passed her desk. Danette, she whispered urgently. HR is waiting in there too. I nodded, squeezed her hand briefly in thanks, and walked toward Patricia's office with my head high despite the knot forming in my stomach. After 10 years of dedication to Meridian, I was about to face the ultimate betrayal. Patricia's office, formerly Richard's, had been transformed. Gone were the comfortable chairs where Richard and I had spent countless hours strategizing. Gone was the wall of photos showing company milestones. Instead, minimalist furniture and abstract art created an environment that felt intentionally intimidating. Patricia sat behind an imposing glass desk with Samantha standing beside her like a loyal lieutenant. Thomas Wright, our company lawyer, sat stiffly in a corner chair, his expression carefully blank. A woman I recognized from Human Resources waited near the door holding a folder. Danette, thank you for coming promptly, Patricia said, not bothering to invite me to sit. This won't take long. The calculated coldness in her voice confirmed my suspicions. This meeting had one purpose only. I've been reviewing your performance and position within Meridian's evolving structure. Patricia continued, her manicured fingers lightly, touching a document before her. It's become clear that there's a significant misalignment between your approach and the company's new direction. I remained silent, watching her performance. Your resistance to necessary changes has created friction throughout the organization. Your unwillingness to support Samantha's integration into our financial operations demonstrates a concerning territorial attitude. Each accusation was more absurd than the last, twisting my professionalism and due diligence into negatives. Patricia continued her rehearsed speech, painting me as obstinate, difficult, and outdated, all while Samantha nodded in artificial agreement. Furthermore, your insistence on overly complex financial models creates unnecessary opacity. Meridian needs clarity and agility moving forward. The irony of being accused of creating opacity by someone who was secretly meeting with competitors wasn't lost on me. I maintained my composure, waiting for her to finish the charade. Therefore, Patricia finally concluded, we're eliminating your position effective immediately. Your salary is an indulgence this company can no longer afford. There it was, the culmination of weeks of systematic undermining. I should have felt shocked or angry, but instead I felt an odd sense of calm. They had played their hand exactly as I had expected. "Do you have anything to say?" Patricia prompted clearly, expecting tears or protests. I simply smiled. "I understand completely." My calm response visibly unsettled her. She had wanted a seen emotional validation that her actions were justified by my difficult nature. My composure denied her that satisfaction. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. He knew how integral I had been to Meridian's success, how baseless these accusations were. His silence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Patricia had consolidated power. "Angela from HR will walk you through the separation process." Patricia continued, slightly thrown by my lack of reaction. "You'll be escorted to collect your personal belongings, and then security will accompany you from the building." The humiliation tactic was predictable. Having me escorted out like a criminal would send a message to anyone else considering resistance to the new regime. Angela handed me a folder containing separation documents. "We'll need your signature on these before you leave today," she said, her voice professionally detached, but her eyes apologetic. I took the folder without opening it. "I'll review these carefully before signing anything." "We need them completed now," Patricia insisted. "I'm entitled to review legal documents before signing them," I replied evenly. "I'm sure Thomas would agree that's standard practice." Put on the spot, Thomas had no choice but to nod. "It's customary to allow review time," he confirmed reluctantly. Patricia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Fine. You have 30 minutes to gather your things and review the documents. Security is waiting outside." As predicted, a security officer I'd known for years stood awkwardly in the hallway. Carl had always greeted me warmly each morning. Now he couldn't meet my eyes, as he was forced to treat me like a potential threat. At my desk, Andrea was fighting back tears. "They can't do this," she whispered furiously. "It's completely unjustified." "It's going to be okay," I assured her, quickly gathering photos and personal items into a cardboard box someone had already placed on my desk. "Don't risk your position by showing support for me publicly." She slipped me a note with her personal contact information. "I'm on your side, whatever happens next." As I packed, colleagues watched from a distance, their expressions ranging from shock to sympathy to fear. Patricia had orchestrated my exit for maximum impact, ensuring everyone witnessed my fall from grace. I maintained my dignity throughout, thanking Carl for his uncomfortable escort service and nodding politely to staff as I passed. Only when I reached my car in the parking garage, doors locked and privacy assured, did I finally allow the emotions to surface. 10 years of dedication. Countless late nights and weekends, sacrificed for Meridian's success. A financial structure I had carefully built now, in the hands of someone unqualified to understand it. The betrayal was profound, not just from Patricia, whose motives were transparent, but from Richard, who had allowed this to happen. Tears streamed down my face as I gripped the steering wheel, allowing myself exactly 5 minutes of grief and rage. Then, methodically, I wiped my eyes, checked my reflection in the mirror, and started the engine. Patricia believed she had won, that I was now powerless to stop whatever plans she had for Meridian. What she didn't know was that I had spent the past decade not just building financial models, but creating safeguards for exactly this type of situation. As I drove home, I remembered a specific clause I had insisted on, including in my employment contract when I became CFO. Richard had joked at the time that I was being overly cautious, but had signed off on it anyway, trusting my judgment as he always had. That signature, not mine, but Richard's, was about to become the most powerful weapon in my arsenal. My home office had never felt so important. As soon as I arrived, I went straight to my personal safe and retrieved a sealed envelope containing my original employment contract. The document represented foresight that 3 years ago even I had thought might be excessive. Sitting at my desk, I carefully reviewed the 20-page agreement, focusing particularly on Section 17 change of control provisions. The language was precise, deliberate, and now potentially invaluable. When Richard had promoted me to CFO, I had insisted on unusual protections, having seen too many financial executives scapegoated during corporate transitions. The key provision stated, in the event of any material change in company leadership structure or ownership direction, the Chief Financial Officer must provide written approval for any financial reorganization, major asset disposals, or transfer of controlling interest. This provision remains in effect for 60 days following any termination of the CFO's employment. At the time, Richard had raised his eyebrows at the clause. Planning a hostile takeover, Danette, he had joked. Just ensuring financial continuity, I had replied. This protects the company from rash decisions during transitions. He had signed it without further question, trusting my judgment as always. Now that trust might save Meridian from Patricia's machinations. I needed legal confirmation that the clause remained enforceable. Thomas Wright would normally be my first call, but his presence in Patricia's office during my termination had made his allegiances clear. I needed independent counsel. Still, Thomas had always respected my financial acumen, even when we disagreed on approach. There was a small chance he might still value Meridian's well-being over Patricia's agenda. I decided to take the risk and reached out. I need 30 minutes of your time. I texted him. Not as Meridian's lawyer, but as someone who's worked alongside me for 7 years. The Owl Cafe tomorrow, 8 a.m. His response came hours later, just a single word, okay. The Owl Cafe was deliberately chosen, a quiet spot across town, unlikely to be frequented by anyone from Meridian. I arrived early, selecting a corner table with good privacy. Thomas arrived precisely at 8, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes instead of his usual suit. I shouldn't be here, he said, immediately sliding into the chair across from me. Yet you are, I noted, pushing a coffee toward him, because you know something's wrong. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. Patricia has a different management approach. That's not illegal or improper. And the secret meetings with Nextech, the altered financial projections, the systematic removal of executives who might question her decisions, I countered. His slight flinch confirmed he knew more than he was admitting. I decided to play my card. I'm not here to ask you to betray client confidentiality, I said, sliding a copy of my contract across the table. I'm here to remind you of Section 17. Thomas stared at the document, then back at me. You can't possibly think this would hold up. It was properly executed, witnessed, and filed with corporate records, I replied calmly. Richard approved it personally. That was 3 years ago under different circumstances. The change of circumstances is precisely what activates the clause, I pointed out, just as it was designed to do. Thomas read through the section carefully, his legal mind dissecting the language. Finally, he looked up. Theoretically, if this were to be enforced, any major financial decision or transaction would require your signature for 60 days following termination. Including a sale to Nextech, I confirmed. I didn't say anything about Nextech, Thomas said quickly. You didn't have to. I've seen the meeting notes, Thomas. He shifted uncomfortably. Even if such discussions were happening, the board would have to approve any acquisition. A board that's being deliberately misinformed about the company's actual financial position, I countered. Patricia's team is presenting manipulated projections that make a sale look like the only viable option. Thomas was silent for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. The clause is unusual, but not inherently unenforceable. Whether it would withstand challenge in court is another question. That was all I needed. Confirmation that my position wasn't legally hopeless. Thank you for your professional opinion, I said, gathering my documents. Danette, Thomas said as I stood to leave. Be careful. Patricia is determined. His warning only strengthened my resolve, so am I. Back home, I focused on gathering ammunition. I needed irrefutable evidence of Patricia's true intentions and the manipulation of company information. More importantly, I needed allies on the board. While I had been methodically excluded from official channels, I still maintained personal relationships with several board members. Leonard Garcia, our longest-serving director, had always valued my financial stewardship. Barbara Chin, who headed the audit committee, had worked closely with me on compliance issues for years. I reached out cautiously, requesting private conversations about post-departure concerns. Both agreed to speak with me, though their caution was evident even in brief text responses. Meanwhile, I compiled a comprehensive financial analysis showing Meridian's true position strong, growing, and positioned for independent success, alongside the manipulated versions being presented internally. I documented every instance of altered projections, highlighting the discrepancies and their implications. I also did something I should have done sooner, researched Patricia Harmon's business background thoroughly. Beyond her luxury retail experience, I discovered a pattern of involvement with companies that were quickly sold after her arrival in leadership positions. In 2 cases, she had received substantial consulting fees from the acquiring companies following the sales potential conflicts of interest that had never been disclosed. Leonard agreed to meet me first at his country club where we could speak privately. A retired finance executive himself, he listened intently as I presented my evidence. I was uncomfortable with the sudden leadership change he admitted after reviewing my documents. Richard assured us it was temporary, but Patricia has been pushing for rapid strategic shifts that seem at odds with our established direction. She's positioning Meridian for a predetermined sale, I explained. The board is being presented with manipulated information to justify that outcome. Leonard frowned deeply. These projections she presented last week, they seemed optimistic, but she insisted they were conservative. I showed him the actual sales pipeline data. Judge for yourself. His expression darkened as he compared the figures. This is more than optimistic. It's deceptive. There's more, I said, explaining my contract clause and its implications. Patricia fired me to remove an obstacle, but she doesn't know about this provision. Leonard studied me carefully. What exactly are you planning, Danette? I'm planning to attend the board meeting on Thursday, I replied. The one where Patricia will present her restructuring plan and likely the next tech acquisition proposal. That's bold, he said, though I detected admiration beneath his concern. Meridian deserves better than to be sold off based on manipulated information, I said firmly. I built the financial structure of this company alongside Richard. I can't stand by while it's dismantled for personal gain. Leonard nodded slowly. I'll make some calls. Discreetly. Barbara proved an even stronger ally when we met the following day. As audit committee chair, she was particularly disturbed by the financial misrepresentations. This borders on securities fraud, she noted grimly, reviewing my evidence. The board has fiduciary responsibilities that could be compromised by these misrepresentations. By Wednesday evening, I had spoken with 4 of the 7 board members. None had committed explicitly to supporting me, but all had expressed serious concerns about the information I'd shared. It would have to be enough. That night, I prepared meticulously for the confrontation to come. I organized my evidence, rehearsed my key points, and chose my outfit carefully, the same power suit I had worn when presenting our successful rescue plan during the cash flow crisis 2 years earlier. Patricia thought she had eliminated me as a threat. She was about to discover how thoroughly she had underestimated me. Thursday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. I felt strangely calm as I dressed and prepared my materials, organizing everything in my leather portfolio. Today would determine not just my professional future, but Meridian's as well. The board meeting was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. I arrived at Meridian headquarters at 9:20, knowing that security protocols would be my first hurdle. Carl, the same security officer who had escorted me out, was manning the front desk. Miss Reynolds, he said clearly, flustered by my appearance. You're not on the visitor list today. I understand, Carl, I replied pleasantly. Please call Leonard Garcia. He's expecting me. Carl hesitated, then made the call. After a brief conversation, he hung up looking confused but relieved. Mr. Garcia says to send you up. Do you need an escort to the boardroom? I think I remember the way I said with a smile. The executive floor was quiet as I walked the familiar path to the boardroom. Outside the door, Leonard was waiting. The timing needs to be right, he said quietly. Wait until Patricia begins her presentation on the restructuring plan. I nodded. Thank you for this. Don't thank me yet, he warned. This could get ugly. Through the partially open door, I could see the board members taking their seats. Patricia stood at the head of the table with Samantha arranging presentation materials nearby. Richard sat to her right looking pale and diminished. Thomas Wright was present as well, his expression tense as he organized legal documents. Patricia called the meeting to order precisely at 9:30. After preliminary business, she turned to the main agenda item. Today we'll be discussing an exciting new direction for Meridian Technologies. She began, her voice smooth and practiced. Our restructuring plan positions us for significant growth through strategic partnership. That was my cue. I took a deep breath, nodded to Leonard, and walked confidently into the boardroom. The reaction was immediate. Patricia stopped mid-sentence, her composure fracturing for an instant before she recovered. Danette, she said, her voice sharp. This is a closed board meeting. You're no longer employed by Meridian. I smiled pleasantly. I'm aware of my employment status, Patricia. I'm here because of Section 17 of my executive contract. Several board members straightened in their seats. Richard's eyes widened slightly. He remembered the clause. This is inappropriate and potentially a security breach. Patricia continued, looking to Thomas. Please call security. Before you do that, I interjected calmly. The board might want to hear about the undisclosed meetings with Nextech executives, or perhaps about the financial projections that have been systematically altered to make Meridian appear less viable as an independent entity. The room went silent. I used the moment to distribute folders to each board member. These contain accurate financial projections based on actual contract values and pipeline data alongside the altered versions you've been presented. Patricia's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You're just retaliating because you couldn't adapt to new leadership. Barbara Chen, the audit committee chair, was already reviewing the documents. These discrepancies are significant, she noted, her tone sharp. Why are the revenue projections we received last week so different from these verified figures? Before Patricia could respond, I continued. The board should also know about Patricia's history with companies that were sold shortly after her arrival in leadership positions. Particularly interesting are the consulting fees she received from acquiring companies afterward. This is slander, Patricia snapped. Thomas explained to the board why this terminated employee should be removed immediately. All eyes turned to Thomas, who looked deeply uncomfortable. Actually, he said carefully, Section 17 of Miss Reynolds' contract does grant her certain rights regarding financial decisions for 60 days following her termination. What contract clause? Patricia demanded. Richard spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but clear. The change of control provision. I approved it when Danette became CFO. Thomas slid a copy of my contract to Richard with Section 17 highlighted. Per the change of control clause, any significant financial restructuring or transfer of controlling interest requires CFO approval for 60 days following termination. Patricia's face contorted with fury. This is ridiculous. No such clause could be enforceable. It was properly executed and filed with corporate records. Thomas replied, his professional demeanor returning as he found himself on familiar legal ground. The company would face significant legal challenges proceeding with any major transaction without Miss Reynolds' approval. Richard. Patricia turned to her husband, voice tight with controlled rage. Tell them this is irrelevant. You're still the majority shareholder. Richard looked at the contract, then at me, then finally at his wife. Something shifted in his expression, a return of the decisive leader I had known for years. The clause is valid, Patricia. I signed it myself. This is about Meridian's future. I addressed the board directly. The company is financially sound and positioned for continued independent growth. The restructuring plan you're about to see is designed with one goal: preparing Meridian for acquisition by Nextech at a valuation far below its true worth. I presented my analysis methodically, showing how the altered projections understated Meridian's potential while exaggerating short-term challenges. The board members, many of whom had financial backgrounds themselves, quickly grasped the implications. "Is there truth to these allegations of meetings with Nextech?" Leonard asked Patricia directly. Her hesitation was damning. "We've had exploratory discussions with several potential strategic partners," she finally said. "It would be irresponsible not to consider all options, including options that benefit you personally through consulting arrangements after the sale," Barbara asked, referencing the documentation I'd provided about Patricia's history. The room temperature seemed to drop as board members connected the dots. Patricia's careful facade crumbled under their scrutiny. Richard knew about these discussions. She insisted, a note of desperation entering her voice. This was all approved. All eyes turned to Richard, who straightened in his chair. "I was aware you were exploring options," he said carefully. "I was not aware of altered financial presentations or your personal connections to Nextech executives." Patricia's face flushed with anger. "This is a coordinated attack on my leadership. Danette was fired because her obstructionist approach was damaging the company. I was fired because I questioned financial manipulations and secretive dealings with competitors," I corrected calmly. "The documentation speaks for itself." The tide had turned. Board members began asking pointed questions about the restructuring plan, the Nextech discussions, and the altered projections. Patricia's responses grew increasingly defensive and contradictory. Finally, Leonard called for a vote. "I move that we temporarily reinstate Danette Reynolds as CFO while conducting a full investigation into these allegations." "Seconded," Barbara said immediately. "This is outrageous," Patricia protested. "You can't possibly." "The motion has been seconded," Leonard interrupted firmly. "All in favor?" 5 hands raised immediately. After a pause, Richard raised his as well, not looking at his wife. "The motion carries," Leonard announced. "Patricia Harmon is temporarily relieved of CEO duties pending investigation." "Richard, will you reassume the position during this period?" Richard nodded, some of his old confidence returning. "I will." Patricia stood abruptly, gathering her materials with shaking hands. "You'll be hearing from my attorneys," she said, voice cold with fury. "All of you." With that, she stormed from the room, Samantha hurrying after her. In the silence that followed, Richard turned to me. "I owe you an apology, Danette. I let personal matters cloud my judgment about what was best for Meridian." "You trusted someone close to you," I said, understanding his position better than most. "That's human." "It was also a failure of leadership," he acknowledged. "One I intend to rectify." The board meeting continued for another hour as we discussed immediate steps to stabilize the company and investigate the full extent of Patricia's actions. As we concluded, Richard asked me to stay behind. When everyone else had left, he sighed heavily. "My health issues are real, though perhaps not as urgent as Patricia suggested. I do need to step back eventually, but not like this. Not by undermining everything we've built." "Meridian is your legacy," I said. "It deserves better than to be sold off based on manipulated information." "Our legacy," he corrected. "I couldn't have built this company without you, Danette. Today proved that more clearly than ever." As I left the boardroom, head high and position restored, I passed my old office where Andrea was working. Seeing me, she jumped up with a questioning look. I gave her a small smile and a thumbs up. Her delighted grin was the perfect punctuation to a morning of vindication. Patricia had fired me thinking she held all the power. She never realized that my true strength lay not in my title, but in my foresight and the relationships I had built on a foundation of integrity. The aftermath of the board meeting rippled through Meridian like a cleansing wave. Patricia's departure was announced simply as stepping down to pursue other opportunities, though the whispered truth spread quickly through the company. Samantha and the other consultants disappeared just as quickly as they had arrived. Richard temporarily resumed CEO duties while focusing on his health treatments, which thankfully proved successful. My reinstatement as CFO came with expanded authority and a seat on the board of directors, acknowledging my role in preserving the company's independence. My first priority was reestablishing financial transparency. I organized a comprehensive review of all reports and projections that had been altered, ensuring the board and leadership team had accurate information. Next came healing the organizational damage Patricia's brief reign had caused. James returned from his exile at the satellite office, joking that he'd enjoyed the vacation, but was glad to be back where the action was. Together, we worked to rebuild trust among the staff who had witnessed the turmoil of recent weeks. The formal investigation into Patricia's actions revealed even more than we had initially discovered. Nextech had offered her a lucrative position post-acquisition, contingent on the sale being completed at their preferred price point. The board referred these findings to outside counsel for potential legal action. Richard and I had several honest conversations about the future. I should have discussed my health concerns with you directly, he admitted during one late evening meeting. Instead, I let Patricia convince me that quick, drastic action was necessary. Why did you let her take over? I asked the question that had bothered me since the beginning. Richard sighed. A combination of factors. The doctors had scared me with worst-case scenarios. Patricia presented herself as the only option that wouldn't alarm investors or staff. And he hesitated. She can be very persuasive when she wants something. She nearly destroyed everything you spent 15 years building, I pointed out. I know, he acknowledged. That's why I need to make amends, starting with you. That conversation led to a significant restructuring, one based on strategic vision rather than personal gain. Richard proposed a 3-year transition plan that would gradually shift leadership responsibilities while maintaining the company's core values and independence. The board unanimously approved my promotion to President and Chief Operating Officer, with a clear path to becoming CEO when Richard fully retired. The announcement was met with standing applause from the staff, a moment of validation I'll never forget. With stability restored, Meridian returned to its growth trajectory. We implemented the 5-year plan Richard and I had developed, expanding into international markets and launching the security products Patricia had dismissed as unnecessary. Within 6 months, our stock price had increased by 34%, vindicating our strategy. Throughout this period, I often reflected on the lessons from this experience. The most profound was understanding that professional expertise must be paired with self-protection. I had designed financial safeguards for Meridian, but had also created personal safeguards through that contract clause, a decision that ultimately saved both my career and the company. I also learned that loyalty should never be blind. My dedication to Meridian and Richard had initially made me hesitant to challenge Patricia's authority directly. That hesitation nearly cost us everything. True loyalty sometimes requires difficult confrontations. The experience changed my leadership approach in meaningful ways. I became more deliberate about mentoring women throughout the organization, especially in departments where they were underrepresented. I established a monthly roundtable where female employees could discuss career advancement strategies and challenges without judgment. Your advocacy has changed the culture here, Andrea told me about 6 months after the confrontation. She had accepted my offer of a promotion to financial analyst, the same position where I had started my Meridian journey. Seeing you stand up to Patricia showed a lot of us what's possible when you know your worth. My relationship with Richard evolved into one of genuine mutual respect. Where once he had been my mentor, we now operated as true partners in steering Meridian's future. He focused on innovation and client relationships, while I managed operations and strategy, each of us leveraging our strengths. During our annual leadership retreat, Richard publicly acknowledged how close the company had come to disaster. We were saved by one person's foresight and courage, he told the assembled team. Danette didn't just protect her position, she protected Meridian's soul. That moment meant more than any promotion or compensation package could. It validated not just my professional expertise, but my commitment to principles over expediency. The most personal lesson was learning to trust my instincts. From the first moment Patricia had looked at me during that initial all-hands meeting, something had felt wrong. I had second-guessed that feeling, trying to be fair and open-minded. Now I understood that those instincts were actually experience and wisdom, speaking voices I would listen to more carefully in the future. 1 year after the confrontation, Meridian celebrated its most successful quarter to date. During the company-wide celebration, Richard called me to the stage unexpectedly. "Leadership isn't about titles," he said, addressing the hundreds of employees gathered. "It's about who people trust when challenges arise. It's about who puts the good of the whole above personal gain." He turned to me. "Meridian exists today because Danette Reynolds embodied those qualities when they mattered most." As I looked out at the faces of colleagues who had become a second family, I felt profound gratitude. Patricia had fired me, believing my signature on termination papers ended my influence. She never realized that my true power came from a different signature, Richard's name on a contract clause I had insisted on years before. But beyond legal clauses and formal authorities, I had discovered that real power comes from building relationships based on integrity, from developing expertise that can't be easily replaced, and from having the courage to stand up for what's right even when standing alone. Have you ever had to stand up against someone who underestimated your preparation and foresight? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that sometimes the quiet preparation you do today becomes the strength you need tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more workplace wisdom, and share with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, know your worth, document everything, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed signature.